Distance shows up in math pretty often, but the two most popular ways that it is shown is through Newton's law of motion and the Pythagorean theorem. Distance is defined as the measure of the interval between two locations. We commonly refer to distance when we ask things like, "Hey, how far is this place from where you live?" or "How far are you from here?" Newton's law of motion puts distance, rate, and time into a few equations so that we can solve for the missing variable. An example equation would be, if we were driving at 45 miles per hour for 3 hours, what would the distance driven be in miles? The equation to use would be the one solving for distance. Distance equals rate multiplied by time. Therefore, plugging in the numbers, the equation would be distance equals 45 times 3, which results in 135 miles traveled. Besides being able to solve for distance, we could switch it up a little and solve for the rate of which the person was driving at, using distance as one of the variables and time as the other. Another example equation is, if we drove 1,500 feet in 5 seconds, what is the rate in feet traveled per second? This equation would be rate equals distance divided by time. Plugging in the numbers, 1,500 divided by 5 equals 300 feet per second. The last equation for Newton's law of motion would be to solve for time. Time equals distance divided by rate. An example equation would be, if we drove 3,400 miles at 420 miles per hour, what is the time in hours? Solving for time, we would take the distance of 3,400 miles and divide it by 420, and the result would be 8.1 hours. Ultimately, solving for distance in Newton's law of motion is simply multiplying the rate of which you were driving by the time it took you to get there. The other equation that involves distance in math is the distance formula. It is used in geometry when dealing with linear equations and graphs. The distance formula solves for the space between 2 points on a graph. When dealing with triangles, the distance formula can pinpoint the hypotenuse of a right angle. You can solve the length of distance using the Pythagorean theorem. Knowing Newton's law of motion and the Pythagorean theorem can be useful in solving for distance in math.